right, good morning, everyone. It's 10:30. We could probably wait. I'm sure people will stream in. That's totally fine. But I have way, way more to say than I really have a right to try to say in an hour. So I should probably start talking now. Latin America is a region of the world that's gone through incredible change just in the last 20 years. If we look at income per capita in the region, go back to 92, that's the red line. We had steady increases. In the 2000s, there was a pretty steep increase in income for people in the region. Okay? Does anyone know why there's been such a big increase in incomes in Latin America during that 10-year period? Yeah. What is it? Recognized. I'm not sure recognition is something that increases incomes. Anyone else? Yeah. The drug trade is definitely not what's going on here. Drug trade's been around for a while. Okay, yeah.
Development.
I mean, development is kind of how we explain growth anywhere, but it's more of a description of it rather than a cause. Yeah? What kind of technology? So it's interesting. It actually has not been a whole lot of technology causing this boom. Not in Latin America. Yeah.
What year was it going up from? What year to what year? 1992 to?
This is 1992 to 2010.
So when did the increase happen? Exactly.
The big, I'm talking about kind of this.
Is that 2000?
Yeah, this is about 2000 to 2008. So during the 2000s, it's actually kind of continued up until just a few months ago, actually. Yeah. So that, I think, is going to partially explain two other trends that I'm going to show you. So the blue trend is actually the trend of the poverty rates. And in a second, I'm going to talk about a trend in inequality. You guys can come sit down for me. Don't feel like you have to stay.
Thank you.
All right. The thing that explains this big increase is the commodity boom. Okay? In large part, China, industry's increasing, and they need natural resources. Latin America is an area that's very strong in natural resources, whether it's oil or copper, other metals, other things. Okay? Prices went up a lot. Incomes went up a lot in Latin America. At the same time that wealth and income are going up, okay, poverty is going down. Those two things are not naturally always tied together. Okay? We live in a country now. Well, not, I guess we as in me. And some of you in the United States where poverty rates are not dropping like a stone, but incomes are increasing. Okay, because income's increasing at the top, it's not being redistributed a whole that much. Okay, but in Latin America, not only has poverty been going down, okay, but this is the Gini Coefficient over time. Now, the Gini Coefficient is a measure of inequality where a 0 is everybody has exactly the same amount. And a 1, or in this case 100, it's on a scale of 0 to 100 here, is one person has all the resources and everybody else has nothing. Okay? For a point of comparison, the United States in the late 2000s, after the government kind of redistributes money through the tax system, okay, our Gini coefficient is about 37.8. Latin America has historically been one of the most unequal regions in the world. We're talking about Gini coefficients between 51 and 53. Sweden's down at 25.9 after they redistribute resources. Okay? But what happened in the 2000s, inequality dropped quite a bit. And again, that's something that's not inextricably linked to a country getting wealthier. It doesn't always go that way. And so the argument I'm going to make today is that a lot of those changes are due to forward-thinking, innovative social policy. There's a lot of heterogeneity in Latin America. It means you can't just assume or think about Latin America as just as one big country. Different countries try different things, and yet there's a lot of commonality between countries in Latin America. Okay. And there's been tremendous innovation in social policy in the region. And so today I'm going to talk about 5 innovative social policy experiments that happened in Latin America over the last 20 or so years. They're not necessarily the most important ones, but I think they're nice examples of kind of the kinds of things that are going on there, okay, and the kinds of things that partially explain these drops in inequality that we've observed and these drops in poverty that we've observed. Okay. First one I'm going to talk about is probably one of the most influential social programs in the world. It was originally launched as Progressa. It's a program where the government pays mothers for keeping kids in school. It does a couple other things too, but that's the main thing, is that if you keep your kids in school, the government will pay you money. Okay? That program has been so successful that when a new president went into office, instead of kind of business as usual, canceling all of the previous administration's programs and then starting up all his own programs, he had to actually keep Progressa around, but at least he wanted to take some credit for it, so he renamed it Oportunidades. Okay. We're going to talk about another program called ALI, for Aligning Learning Incentives, where the government pays students, teachers, and administrators for kids doing well on tests. Okay. We'll talk more about the detail of that program. We'll talk about a program in Guatemala. Okay, not a broad-ranging program, but more of an experimental program that actually increased, improved nutrition of little kids. Okay. We'll talk about national health insurance in Costa Rica. Costa Rica has had national health insurance since the mid-70s. One of the very first countries in the world to have national health insurance. And we'll talk about school vouchers. So a few years ago, people used to talk a lot about school vouchers in the United States. These are programs where instead of saying to kids, you can go to public school for free, or you can pay quite a bit of money to go to private school, you hand out vouchers to kids. And those kids can use those vouchers to then go to a private school instead. And the government, instead of paying for their slot at the public school, shifts that money and pays it to the private school instead. Economists love this idea because it imposes choice and competition. And the idea is that entrepreneurs can come in and start up schools, and if they're good schools, students will go to them, and the public schools, based on that competition, will say, boy, now we have to compete. If we're going to have students, we better up our game. Okay? And so fairly simple economic models show that systems like vouchers should improve school quality. We've talked a lot about these sorts of things in the US. We've debated them, but generally we don't do it. Teachers' unions are very strong. But Latin America has tried it. In fact, Chile is a country that has vouchers at the nationwide level and has had them for quite a while. We're going to talk about a particular program in Colombia that uses them called PACES. All right. Go. Let's start with the vouchers. So in 1991, the Colombian government distributed 125,000 vouchers to students in Bogota and the other large cities in Colombia. Okay. To get a voucher, You had to be a low-income high school student. Okay? They didn't give all of the low-income high school students these vouchers. They gave 60% of them vouchers. And so of those people that applied, randomly 60% were chosen to get the vouchers. That's a really key component of the program, that random assignment. The voucher, you got to keep your voucher. If you kept working hard in school and doing well, you could continue to go to the school. Otherwise, it got taken away. The reason why that randomization is important is because suppose we wanted to know how much better these private schools were than the public schools. Well, one way to do that would be to take outcomes of the private school kids and compare them to outcomes of the kids that go to public school. Would it be okay to attribute the difference in those two outcomes to the quality of the private school?
What's the question again?
So suppose I took kids' test scores or graduation rates at public schools, and then I took kids that went to private school and I looked at their graduation rates and test scores. And I compared the two. And they're going to be different. Is it okay to attribute that whole difference to quality of the school that they went to?
I mean, it doesn't have to be necessarily the schools that they're researching. It could go to the students themselves. And
Right.
evaluating the test scores, I guess, not the best way to evaluate the schools themselves because aside from education, the kids could have abilities in arts and other major.
For sure, schools transmit more than just math skills and reading skills.
So they should evaluate the skills overall instead of just one education, but they should also consider their talent.
But you're, yeah.
Presuming that all the children in the public and private schools have equal intelligence, like on average.
But that's exactly the problem.
Yeah.
That's exactly the
If
problem.
it was equal,
Then it might be okay. But they're not. The kids that go to private school are not the same as the kids that go to public school. I can say it because I went to public school. And at Yale, I teach a lot of kids that went to private school. They're not the same kids. Some overlap, but they're not the same kids. But if you take the kids that applied to this program and you randomly divide them up and you say 40% of them, sorry, you've got to continue to go to your public school. And then 60%, all right, you have the opportunity to go to this private school. Those groups are by construction identical, okay? Because you just randomly split them up, okay? And so what we're going to do, what Angrist and his co-authors do in this 2006 paper that evaluates this program, what they do is that's the comparison they make, okay? They want to look at graduation rates first. They've got data from, so one of the lessons that I want to try to convey today is that it's the evaluation of the program that's really important. Because until you evaluate the program, you don't know if it worked or it didn't work. Kind of a priori, you have some ideas, but you need data, and you need statistical methods to tell you what differences are. You need a kind of a smart design, okay? And so what these guys did is they looked at who took the ISFES college entrance exam, like the SAT or the ACT in Colombia. Okay? 90% of the kids that take that exam graduates. And most of the kids that don't take the exam don't graduate. So it's a pretty good proxy for who graduates. And ISFES has all the data. Whereas the actual graduation rates, those are held by the individual schools. So it's not perfect, but it's not so bad and it's feasible. So here's what they find when they compare graduation rates between these folks that got the voucher and the folks that did, the winners and the losers. Okay? On average, about 35% of students took the exam. There's about a 7 percentage points increase in graduation rates for those students that got the voucher. That's a huge effect. Okay? I'm showing you the actual table from the paper itself, not because I expect you to understand what all these numbers mean, but just to show you that when you can open up real contemporary economic research, and you can pull things out that are understandable. Okay? So these are just different ways that they did the estimation, because they had to match up different things. They had to get the PACES program data and match it to the actual test-taking administrative data. And they did that in a few different ways. But the bottom line is, no matter how they did it, pretty much get this between 5 and 7% increase in graduation rates. That's pretty good. Okay? Now, suppose they want to look at the actual scores on this test. Is it okay to take the scores of the winners and the scores of the losers and compare them to say that that's the effect of the program on how you do on the tests? I saw someone shaking their head. This is a tricky one, actually. Even though we've got randomly assigned groups. Were you going to?
I mean, I think it is because it theoretically shows the effect. Like, people who go to private school are more likely to do that.
So for sure they are. But we also want to know what's the difference in the test scores. Like, does going to a private school make you do better on the test itself? So we can look for another effect. Yeah.
It's not about what school you go to. It's about you. It's about your the way you feel about the thing you're studying. It's not about what school you go to.
But part of it is. And it might be that going to the private school, they're better teachers. And so you're going to do better on the test. There might be a causal effect. It's not entirely explaining how you do on the test.
But in my opinion, I think
Well, we're going to see if that's true. Actually, we're not even going to see. We're going to look at these two randomly assigned groups. We've got kids that won the voucher and went off to school, went off to the private school, and kids that lost the voucher and didn't. And we can compare the differences between those scores. Yeah.
I think the private school students will get higher scores because, of course, it's a private school. The teachers are more qualified to teach them, and the students are more serious about their future, so they're going to study more.
But these students going into, they were the same. It's just ahead of time. It's just some of them went to the private school. And now maybe the reason that they're going to do better on the test is because they're going to be around these other kids that chose to go to private school and had richer parents and had more books at home. Okay? And there'll be peer effects. And the teachers are different. Okay? But whatever difference we observe, maybe that's due to the school, but it's not due to pre-existing differences between these kids. Okay? But what I want to tell you is, even when we have this randomization, it's still not enough. Because these kids that get randomly assigned to go to this private school, some of them wouldn't have taken the test before. But now they're saying, hey, I'm around all these kids that are going to go to college. I'm going to take the test too. Okay, so it's a different subset of those kids that are taking the test. Okay? And so if the way people decide whether to take the test is, can I do well enough to get to college, you're going to have more kids taking the test, and some of those kids are going to be weaker. And so just comparing test scores between these two groups doesn't give you the actual effect of private school. And in fact, when we compare the winners and the losers, there's actually very little effect, a very little difference in the test scores. We can use fancy statistical methods. Here I'm waving my hand. Okay? When I teach this here, I generally have students that have taken at least a semester, usually more, of statistical methods. Okay? So I'm going to wave my hands and I'm going to say, when you correct for this difference and you get a true causal effect of going to the private school, we're seeing about a 3-point increase in test scores, both for girls and for boys. Okay? So we've got a program here that increases graduation rates and improves test scores. But they canceled the program in 1997. Which is a shame. You've got this program. It's been shown to be pretty good. What the heck's going on here? Why would they cancel it? Cancel it for a variety of reasons. So first of all, once the program got going, entrepreneurs came in and created for-profit private schools that would accept vouchers and generate really poor education. And they would fool kids into coming to those schools. So that's the low-quality entrance into the private school market. And that was messing things up. The program wasn't actually run all that well. So payments to the schools were actually late. The voucher amounts, they didn't increase over time. And so the private school said, we're not getting enough money here. Forget it. We're not going to participate. And they would drop out of the program. And then finally, all of these rural people were funding the program. They're paying taxes too, and they're getting no benefits at all. Okay? And so this program that seemingly was pretty good just went down in flames. Too bad. Okay?
Ethically speaking, it seems a little cruel.
A little.
Cruel. Do you randomly pick people here like testing?
So most of the programs I'm going to talk about today are piloted this way, specifically so we can measure, so we can get good estimates of how effective they are. And we did that. But once the pilot's done, there's no need to do that randomization anymore. And so what they could have done is they could have improved standards for allowing these private schools to come in. They could have paid the schools better, increased the rates with the market. They could have expanded it to the rural population, but they didn't do any of those things. Instead, they just canceled the program. Yeah.
Was your basis designed to target the low-income population?
In the urban areas. There weren't enough private schools in the rural areas. And it was a pilot. They were testing out this program to see if it worked. And it worked, and they said, hooray, but it was too late. No, they canceled. It's amazing how often that happens. Yeah.
Was it actually like a financial program or?
It was an expensive program. Each of these 125,000 vouchers was worth $190. Now, it's also true that for each voucher they handed out, they didn't have to pay for a kid in school. And those seats in school cost about $300. But there were fixed costs, and so they ended up having to pay both. So it was in the short run, it was very expensive. Yeah.
So what the answer was the cost even worth it? I mean, the actual cost of the government pay was it worth the return from students having higher education?
I mean, when the students have the higher education, the long-term returns are huge to the country. So long-term, you do the math, it's for sure worth it. But unfortunately, a lot of these decisions are made based on short-term returns.
The question is, if they reinvested into public schools, making public schools a lot better than what they are right now.
I mean, they didn't do that. I mean, you mean maybe they canceled this program and they took that money and poured it into the public schools? I mean, my feeling was that the big problems in the public schools in Colombia were not just funding. They were organizational. And so the idea was this program was going to incentivize those schools to shape up. Yeah.
Excuse me, so first, both public school students and private school students did the PACES?
No. Only kids that were going to public school anyway.
Oh, okay.
So these were low-income kids. Most of them didn't go to a private school. Yes.
How long did you run for?
6 years. 91 to 97. Yeah, not very long. So in fact, a lot of these results came after. This paper wasn't published until 2006. And so at the time when these decisions were getting made, they didn't actually know really well. They had there was some analysis before about short-term effects where they showed that grades were increasing, but these big effects on graduation and graduation test scores weren't actually available. All right. So, these voucher programs, the devil really is in the details. All right. So let's move on to Costa Rica. So Costa Rica has one of the lowest infant mortality rates in the world. Okay, we're talking kids 0 to 1, about 8 per 1,000 die before their first birthday. In the U.S., it's 6 per 1,000. It's not all that much better. And this is in a country where the per capita GDP, so average incomes, are about $10,000 compared to the U.S., where we're right around $50,000. So how do they do it? Well, one of the things that Costa Rica has had for a long time is national health insurance. It started rolling out in 1973. And if we look at infant mortality rates, starting in 1960, they're declining. But then, kind of in the early 70s, they really drop a lot. And then they've kind of flattened out. Kind of all the low-hanging fruit's been picked at this point. Okay. So based on this, can we conclude that national health insurance in Costa Rica reduced infant mortality rates?
It could be a factor, but also it doesn't take into account like technology. It's probably safer. It was easier to give birth in 1980 than 1960 due to the improvements in medical technology.
Medical technology's changed along the same time. What else has changed? Number of births has changed, but we're talking about rates. Right. Fertility rates have dropped, and so, but I'm not sure why that would reduce infant mortality.
Because you have fewer children, therefore there's a bigger likelihood that they survive.
Because you can take your finite resources and focus them on the smaller number of children. That's exactly right. They can take those resources and apply them to a smaller number of kids. That's right. Yeah.
Maybe a small factor also means that time people became more educated and how to treat
Moms have become more educated during this time.
I don't know if it's right, but I think doctors developed more. New doctors came out like from new colleges and stuff.
Yeah, so medical technology, both in terms of equipment and just medical knowledge, increased a lot during this time. Health infrastructure. Sanitation infrastructure. There's all sorts of things that improved along this time. A lot of these kids that were dying over here were getting these infectious diseases. Okay? Well, if we can improve the quality of the water, then they won't get them to begin with. So there's a lot going on. So it's very dangerous to just look at a trend and say, oh, well, it's trending down, therefore this happened, that must be what's going on. This is the sort of argument you see in the newspaper fairly regularly. Okay? Two trends, they're going the same way, one must cause the other. And so, someone named Will Dow, an economist at Berkeley, and Schmier, I can't remember her first name, took a closer look. Okay? And the first thing they did to actually see how much of an effect the rollout of national health insurance was is they looked in states or counties in Costa Rica, and they said some of these counties were very quick in rolling out health insurance for kids, and others were slower. So maybe in those counties that were fast, we should see bigger drops, okay, in infant mortality. And that's what this estimate right here in the square is. It's minus 0.87. So it's a big negative drop associated with rolling out health insurance. Okay? Those counties that rolled it out quicker experienced bigger drops. But that's not that great an estimate either. Because those counties that were rolling out the health insurance quicker were probably also making these other changes too. Okay? Their birth rates were probably dropping faster. The moms were getting more education faster than the other places. The infrastructure is probably improving as well. Okay? Well, using statistical methods, we can control for these things. We can say, holding 2 counties, we're only going to compare counties that rolled out their, let's say mother's education increased the same rate, but one of them rolled out health insurance faster than the other. When we control for that, we hold constant these mother's education changes, suddenly the effect is not as big. We're down at minus 0.7. Okay? When we then account for household characteristics that might have changed. So these are who gets clean water? What's the sanitation infrastructure in the household itself? And we say we're only going to compare counties that have the same levels of household infrastructure. Okay? And we're going to look at the ones where health insurance rolled out faster and compare them to the ones where it rolled out slower. Well, in those, if we account for that, we get an even smaller effect of the health insurance. Now it's about minus 0.3. And when we look at changes in household wealth, we only compare counties that had similar levels of wealth where one, it dropped, one, they rolled out the health insurance faster than the other. We're down at minus 0.25. And when we put all of these things in together, there's almost no effect at all. Okay? I'm not saying that children's health insurance is a bad idea. I'm just saying that there's no causal effect on infant mortality rates. It has other effects. When people don't have to worry as much about whether they have enough money for their kids' care, it allows them to do lots of other things. And that's pretty nice. Okay? Having a healthier set of kids in your country, it's better. It reduces all sorts of problems. But reducing the infant mortality rate is not one of the benefits. Yeah.
But didn't the infant mortality rate drop?
Yeah, but it didn't drop because of the health insurance. It dropped because of these other reasons, these other things that were going on.
How can you be sure that they were not affected by the implementation of the national health insurance?
I mean, you'd have to tell a story that says that implementation of the national health insurance caused households to get wealthier and improve their sanitation health. I mean, it's possible. It freed up resources. That's possible. Okay? But at that point, it's almost the same as just transferring wealth to the community. And I think it's the right choice. Like, I'm very pro universal health care. I'm just saying let's be careful about what we attribute to it and what we don't attribute to it. And the decreases, the big decreases that we've seen in infant mortality in Costa Rica are not due to this. They're due to other great things that they've done. And there are other effects of this program that aren't this. All right. So back in the late 60s and early 70s, a group of researchers at the International Food, well, it's IFPRI, International Food and Something Program, okay, and Emory University and the Guatemalan government decided once and for all, we need to know how important childhood nutrition is to kids' lives. Okay? So what they did is they took 4 villages, 4 very poor rural villages in Guatemala, and they randomly assigned 2 of them to a treatment group where the kids in those villages got as much of this warm, rich, protein-rich supplement that they would call atole. Okay, it's like a porridge. And they thought that this was probably pretty darn healthy. The other village, I like to say they basically got Kool-Aid. It wasn't bad for them. It was kind of cool, but it was fairly low calorie. It was kind of sugary and had no protein at all. And they could drink as much of that as they wanted. Okay, so we could spend the next half hour and probably a lot more debating the ethics of this experiment. Because I'm betting that a lot of you think that this is just pure evil, that they would do this. But let me say that without this experiment, A, all 4 villages wouldn't have even had the fresco. They'd have nothing. And B, by running this experiment, we get hard, good, reliable estimates of the effects of protein at a young age that we didn't have before. Okay? I truly believe that you can have the best intentions in the world and have a really great policy, but unless you have good estimates of how valuable it is, what are its effects, it's not going anywhere. Okay? And today, we have great evidence about the effects of protein supplementation for kids. But then we didn't. And so this is a way to get that. I'll also say that part of this program, both villages, or both sets of villages, all 4 villages, got improved medical care for both kids and adults. Okay? So we're going to compare outcomes in the Atole villages and the Fresco villages. We're going to see how big effects there are. Okay. The girls in the Atole villages, on average, completed more than a year more school than the girls in the Fresco villages. The boys, there's no effect on their schooling at all. They were completing the same. They completed the same amount of schooling in both sets of villages. But when we look at test scores, reading comprehension tests and nonverbal cognitive ability tests, there are massive effects. And this is focused specifically on whether or not you got that protein supplementation from 0 to 2. Huge effects. We wouldn't know that if it weren't for this study. A lot of the funding for early childhood nutrition programs is based on studies like this. Like this is how we motivate a lot of the policy choices that we make today. Okay. So, early kid nutrition, pretty important. Now I want to talk about this Progressa program. Progressa has been incredibly influential. At least 40 countries around the world have some version of a program like this in their countries now. In Mexico, Progressa, well, now Oportunidades, accounts for something like 40% of anti-poverty spending in the country. Okay, it's the biggest social program in the country. So what does it do? It gives money to moms for each kid that they have enrolled in school. Okay? Those grants increase with each grade. Okay? So they don't pay you as much for keeping your kid in primary school. The idea is that we want to incentivize behavior, and people were putting their kids through primary school anyway. So they give you fairly small grants there. But once they get to college, they're paying you quite a bit of money to keep, well, high school, they're paying quite a bit of money for you to keep your kids in school. And they give more money to families for keeping their girls in school. Okay? Because they're trying to close that gap. They want more girls to be going to school. Okay? To even it out. Now, the fact is they've succeeded. In the world today, the probability of a girl being in high school is higher than it is for a boy. And it doesn't seem to be flattening out. It actually seems to be expanding. So I doubt that they're going to continue to do this for all that much longer. There's also a key component of the program where they would give medical care for moms that had little kids and nutrition supplements for moms that had little kids. When they rolled this program out originally, they did it as a randomized controlled trial. 286 communities. They followed them very closely and measured outcomes of kids in those communities. But they didn't actually change anything. Okay? But 320 of these communities actually got the program. And so what they were able to do is, as the program marched on, they were able to actually measure and see what's the difference between the kids that were in the communities that got the program and the kids that weren't. Okay? And they found some pretty big effects. So 20% increase in the enrollment of secondary school girls. Okay, 10% increase in the likelihood of enrollment for boys in secondary school. Primary school enrollment was pretty close to universal, and they're not seeing much of an effect there at all. Okay, those families that were keeping, those few families that were keeping their kids out of primary school, these grants were not enough to actually get them to change their behavior very much. And then the health component seems to have lowered incidence of illness by about 12% for kids 1 to 5. This program is called the Conditional Cash Transfer Program. You get the money only if you kind of meet these, you do what they want you to do. So the idea is here's the carrot, the grant's the carrot, and then they want you to do these things. There's no stick. Okay? So, I said earlier that a whole bunch of countries all around the world have copied this program. Why have they copied the program? Is it because this is the best way to actually roll out benefits to families and reduce poverty? No, that's not what's going on here. The reason this program has been so influential is because we have hard estimates of its effect. We know it's effective. There are lots of other programs out there that also reduce poverty that might be just as effective. The reason that this program's been so influential is because it was rolled out initially as this randomized controlled trial that allowed researchers to actually come up with really good estimates for how well it worked. Okay? And it's worked pretty well. Now, have people copied this randomization component when they copy the program? No, not so much. That would be nice. It is true that around the world, when people roll out programs, both in the developed world and in the developing world, they're way more likely to roll them out thinking about evaluation up front. And whether they do that through a randomized controlled trial or some other way, there is more thought paid to that these days. All right, so I've got one more program I want to talk about. This is this ALI program. This is a program that started, about 8 years ago. And what happened was the Minister of Education was an economist. And when he got his job, he said, I want to do the next Progressa. I want to have some very innovative new program that, now that the kids are in school, improves school outcomes. And so what he did is he called up all his friends around the world that knew about education policy and were creative. He brought them all to Mexico City and he talked to them. He said, I want each of you to come up with your best ideas. I was working at the University of Pennsylvania at the time, and it just so happened that the group that ended up getting the contract, the idea that he liked the best, was a group of people mostly located at Penn. And ALI is the program they came up with. So they took 88 high schools around Mexico. What they did is they divided them up into a control group and 3 different treatment groups. Okay? The first treatment group, they would actually tell students in these schools, here is a payment schedule. For these scores and these improvements on your previous year's score, you get these cash payments. Okay, so they're actually paying the students to do better on these tests. The test was a new test, not related to anything else. and it was administered by a third party. So it was relatively difficult to cheat on. Did the kids figure out how to cheat? Yeah, they did. Did the researchers come up with a really clever way of catching it and adjusting their estimates for it? Yes, they did. Okay? So treatment one, they're paying the kids to do better on these tests. They gave them the test at the beginning of the year. They gave them the test at the end of the year. And then they can compare how well those kids did to the control group where there were no incentives at all. Okay, treatment group 2, they paid the teacher. Okay, they said, maybe it's not an effort issue from the students. Maybe it's an effort issue from the teacher's end. Maybe if we give the incentive to the teacher and we say, we'll pay you more if your students do better, maybe that'll actually improve test scores. Right? And then they said, well, maybe, and here's some economics jargon, maybe there are complementarities of production. Maybe you need both the students and the teachers working together. Maybe they both need to have like kind of eyes wide open, focused on learning. Okay? And so treatment group 3 was actually a combination where they paid the money to the students and they paid the money to the teachers. And the principal got money too. So the administrators got money too. And the other teachers in the school, they got some money. So everybody's on the same page. Kids do better on the tests. We all get paid. Okay. So, my question to you all, how well each of these programs work? Because now we know we can get estimates for the program effects. So how many of you think that treatment group 1 had no effect? Okay, question. No, after. You get no money until you take the test. And then if you do badly on the test, you get nothing. So how many think that kind of small or moderate effects from paying the kids? Again, how many think big effects paying the kids? Okay, so a mix, small, moderate, and big. So the answer is there's moderate positive effects from paying the kids. There's significance. Okay? They're not huge. What about the second group, paying the teachers? How many think there's no effect of really paying the teachers at all? Okay, a few people. How many think kind of moderate to small effects paying the teachers? And how many think big effects paying the teachers? Okay. So when they asked, so they brought in all the teachers before the program started and told them what they were doing for all the 88 schools. When they talked to the teachers all said that group 2, it's not going to work. We're all working as hard as we can already. And the problem is not us, it's the kids. The kids are just not working hard. And so they all thought that T1 was going to have a big effect, and T2, no effect at all. Okay, well, the teachers were right. Which, of course, like if they're going into it thinking, there's nothing I can do, they're not going to work hard at it. And so it's almost a self-fulfilling prophecy. But the fact is, giving these cash payments to teachers for better scores for the students had no effect at all. Okay. What about group 3? How many people think that there's no effect here? And how many think there's kind of small or moderate effects? And how many think they're big effects? So there are massive effects. Really big effects. It turns out that when everybody's kind of on the same page, it makes a huge difference. The kids are excited to get the money and their eyes are wide open. But if they don't have help, They can't maximize their learning. But the teachers are thinking, this is great. If those kids now they have a better attitude, I'm going to have a better attitude. Everybody has a better attitude. And the administration is supporting it. Now, I will say that before the correction was made, so the way that people cheated on these tests, they didn't get the tests ahead of time. They didn't grade the tests and cheat when they were grading. But they did take tests together. And so what the researchers found is that in those schools where these were the incentives, well, there were a lot of cases where exams looked very similar between the top performing student and several other students got very similar answers to that top performing student. And so there was copying. And so when you notice that and you say, well, that person who copied probably wouldn't have done that much better, and you push their score down, rescore, and then you compare results, you still get these big effects. So what we find is that monetary effects, not only do they seem to increase kind of studying and learning, they also increase cheating, which is not so great. Okay. All right, so let's step back. We looked at 5 different programs, and I like to think that you've learned that social policy can be really powerful. And Latin America has, honestly, they've been at the forefront of these sorts of things. These reforms to healthcare systems, these reforms to the school systems. Okay. At the same time, the details really matter. So I said earlier that Bogota had this, or Colombia had this voucher program that was seemingly quite successful, but there were a few things they did wrong that caused the program to be canceled. Chile also has a voucher system that's nationwide. Okay, so any student in the country can choose to go to the private school or to their local public school. Okay, all the evaluations I've seen of the Chilean system show that actually doesn't have much of an effect at all. That these private schools that the kids are going to are not increasing test scores or graduation rates. Okay, but the people are really happy about it. And the reason is it's the details. So the Chilean system is not restricted to low-income students. And so what happens is the relatively high-income students in the poor neighborhoods, they all leave and go to the private school. Not because it's better, but because they get to separate. So it allows people to self-segregate in ways that are not necessarily better for learning outcomes, but seemingly make people happier in the individual level. Okay? So these details, they really matter when you're designing public policy. And then the third lesson is, in order to know if something works, you need to design it as best you can ahead of time. You need good data. Okay? Every one of these policies I've talked about, we've applied data. Like researchers have applied data and statistical methods to try and figure out what the effect is. Okay? There are a lot of ways to mess it up, and there are a lot of ways to get it right. Okay, so the last thing I want to say is when you eventually go to college, and if you have the opportunity now, take as many statistical methods classes as you can, because the world's going this way. So it's not just policy design that's becoming more and more evidence-based, but everything is, whether it's medicine or whether it's marketing decisions, business decisions, everything. It's all going evidence-based, and the more you know about this, the more you can kind of make better decisions. Not the only way to make decisions, but it's a really key part. So we still have a few minutes. Does anyone have any questions? I'm going to lunch with you guys, so you can ask more questions there. That's better. But let's stop there. Thank you very much.